Former head coach Jimmy Johnson and the 90s triplets reunited for the 25th anniversary of their first Super Bowl as a group. The biggest surprise of the party was that Jerry and Johnson were pretty friendly. This comes as a surprise since the two have been at odds since 1994 when Jerry decided to move on from Johnson after winning back-to-back Super Bowls. Max, is this kind of rekindled relationship a sign that Jerry's starting to get it?
I think the answer is yes. I think the answer is yes here. And I'm a Giants fan, which means a notorious Cowboys hater. That's right. Boy, I hate the Cowboys. And yet, and by the way, it's been a lot of fun as a Giants fan watching this narcissist in his old age kind of devolve to the place where, you know, at first he was very good at manipulating the rules, going back 2 decades plus. And then the league caught up, and he hasn't been good at much of anything as a GM. But in the autumn of his years, Stephen A., and by autumn, I mean like December 20th, like winter is coming, like Game of Thrones with this guy. I mean, he's getting up there in age, and I think a narcissist sees their reflection in everything. And when he looks at that handsome devil looking back at him, I think he would like a dignified old age, a dignified final act, where he could actually enjoy winning again. And I think we're seeing that in the reconciliation with Jimmy Johnson, to the extent that it's a reconciliation, and the ceding of power to his son, which has resulted in an excellent team. I think, yes, in the autumn of his years, he's getting it.
You know, this is funny. This is absolutely hilarious. Let me get this straight. So because they hooked up together and had some nice dinner, shaking hands, being complimentary with one another, probably hugging and singing Kumbaya to one another, Jerry Jones gets it? Oh, just stop it. That's not what happened here. You know what happened here? The Cowboys actually looked respectable this year. That's what happened. They looked respectable without Jimmy Johnson. That's what happened here. Because he's been gone and he isn't around to take any credit, and you can't help but give Jerry Jones some credit, he doesn't mind being seen in the same vicinity as Jimmy Johnson, because Jimmy Johnson's on Fox on Sundays. Jimmy Johnson's on Fox on Sundays. Jerry Jones is not. So because Jerry Jones is not, and Jimmy Johnson ain't there to take credit, to lead off of it, because we got to remember the last time Jerry Jones was relevant was when they was winning 3 Super Bowls in 4 years. And even though they won that last Super Bowl.
Harry Switzer, that was Jimmy Johnson's team.
That was Jimmy Johnson's team. That was Jimmy Johnson's personnel, and Jerry Jones still wasn't getting credit. But 22 years later, even though you haven't won, even though you haven't won a Super Bowl,
didn't win a playoff game this year.
Well, listen, they didn't win a playoff game this year.
Yeah,
but you went 13-3. You are on the come up.
Of course they
are. You look respectable, and as a result, we're talking about the youth on the Cowboys. So Jimmy Johnson is not a threat to me anymore. I can now be
very interesting take.
That's what this is.
That is. I agree with you, Molly. That's a very interesting take, a strong take out of you, Stephen A. Smith.
Usually is.
But when
go ahead.
But when you say what happened was, it didn't just happen. It wasn't happenstance. It was his son, Stephen Jones, taking control, picking offensive linemen. I think it was in the first round 4 out of 5 seasons. Very difficult it must have been for Jerry Jones to do that with all like the sexy skills position. Yeah, and he keeps taking Zach Martin, one offensive lineman after another in the first round. It didn't just happen. It wasn't a passive arrangement. It was an active change in the organization. That in itself shows maturity on the part of a very old man, by the way, but okay, we all mature at different rates. And the fact that he can now, even if the embrace of Jimmy Johnson here is a result of the success of the team having nothing to do with Jimmy Johnson, it still has to do with Jerry Jones ceding power. And that is maturity. That's what led to this moment. They still haven't won a playoff game.
Maturity? Jerry Jones.
Yes.
Really? You know, I remember when I was watching Saturday Night Live and Alec Baldwin was talking about, oh, come on, I'm just trying to be cool. Back then, I was a shy, impetuous 59-year-old man. All right, you understand what I'm saying? I'm not paraphrasing there, but that's basically what he was saying. So Jerry Jones, who's, 73, 74 years old, he's matured.
Emotionally,
he's a late bloomer.
That's what we're saying, he's matured? Really? That's your argument? Stop it. The fact is, Jimmy Johnson's been gone long enough where he can no longer steal credit from Jerry. And as a result, Jerry is okay being around him. But if you saw Jimmy Johnson and you thought about him and Jerry Jones together, you would inevitably find yourself giving Jimmy Johnson credit instead of Jerry Jones. And that's
you're
what
looking at it in a vacuum. Look at it in the context of a larger situation of what's going on with the Dallas Cowboys.
Now,
Jerry
I brought that
Jones was
up.
always the GM. He's the GM in name. He's not really the GM
but that's
anymore.
Not him. The point is that ultimately somebody like Max is going to look at Stephen Jones. When you think about the Dallas Cowboys in this day and age, you do. You
thinking how many rings would they have?
You thought of Jimmy Johnson in a long time.
But you think of Jerry Jones. You weren't thinking about Jerry Jones before you were thinking about Jimmy Johnson. You're not thinking about Stephen Jones now. You think about Jerry Jones, Stephen Jones. You think about Jerry Jones. That's what you think about
now. I lost
now.
track of the Joneses somewhere.
That's right.
If they stayed together, how many rings would they have had?
I mean, look, the fact is they underachieved. Barry Switzer, it's not that he's a bad coach or anything. He's a really interesting guy. But you would never have guessed just one more at that time. You'd have guessed at least 2 or 3.
I'd say one more. Here's why. Because Dion still would have beat you that year. Barry Switzer was there. He would have beat the Jimmy Johnson team. When Primetime went to San Fran, they would have still beat Dallas. Now, you would have won again if Prime had come to Dallas. But if Prime had stayed in San Francisco...
Jimmy Johnson, what makes you think he doesn't?
Well, I'm just saying. That's my point. That would have happened. But if Jimmy Johnson stays in Dallas, but Primetime never comes... You still might have had 3 and 4, but you ain't going to have a whole bunch.
Right. Dion was the balance of power more than anyone back then.
No question. Stephen A's final take. We'll look at the historic night for ESPN at the Oscars, but the night ended with controversy.
The Academy Award for Best Picture.
Come on. La La Land.
There's a mistake.
Again, too much scrutiny. It's not good.
We got to move on here. Speaking of scrutiny, the biggest trade of the NBA trade deadline hasn't exactly been working out for the Pelicans. DeMarcus Cousins and his new squad are 0-3 since he joined New Orleans. Sunday night, the Pelicans lost to the Thunder, and to make matters worse, Cousins received his 18th technical of the season less than a minute into the game. He will now have to serve a 1-game suspension. Here's Cousins after the game.
You know, I don't feel like I did anything wrong to receive it, so you know, hopefully the league handles it the right way, and hopefully I get the benefit of the doubt. We got to work on us right now. We got to figure this thing out in house, and that should be the main goal at this moment, which is figuring it out, figuring out what's best for the team, figuring out what's the best way for us to play together.
All right, Stephen A., I know this trade just happened, but what's wrong with the Pelicans?
They're not good enough. They don't have anybody other than the 2 players that they have. Drew Holiday is a solid player, but he's not a superstar point guard. Anthony Davis is an absolute stud. DeMarcus Cousins is a stud offensively. Defensively, he's not intimidating anybody. He's not a shot blocker. He's not a rim stopper. That's not who he is. You combine that with the fact that Alvin Gentry still has a lot to prove as a head coach in this game. Remember, I highlighted last week, as much as I like and respect Alvin Gentry, because he does know basketball, he's been a head coach for 14 seasons in this league. He's had 2 winning seasons. 2. The bottom line is you can't escape that reality. And so we're going to learn a lot about their maturation with one another, but we're also going to learn a lot, even in this short period of time, even with a hellacious schedule, because they had Oklahoma City and Dallas and Houston, these 3 games that they lost. They got San Antonio coming up, I think Utah down the road, Detroit, etc. We're going to find out not just what they're made of, we're going to find out what Alvin Gentry's made of.
This one ain't that hard. Pelicans are no good. I mean, they're not good. They're Anthony Davis and a collection of parts that aren't good enough. Holiday's nice. As you said, he's solid. He's not the idea that he's supposed to be part of a big 3. Stop. He's okay. They're not a good team that just added a major piece who, by the way, essentially plays the same position. They do some things differently that their best player already plays. So anytime you add a huge piece midstream, you have to integrate it, particularly when there's some redundancy. You have to figure out high-usage players, how that's going to work, and the team isn't very good to begin with. The questions about Boogie Cousins being a winning or losing player under any circumstances will be answered partially as time goes on. But the idea that these 2 couldn't play together, I think, is far-fetched. I think that over time, this team will be better, obviously, for the trade of an extremely talented, valuable piece in Boogie Cousins. And if you think back to Kevin Durant on the Golden State Warriors and how that looked, on a well-oiled machine, you added a Durant who wasn't redundant. Look how they looked against San Antonio early in the season. Terrible.
It is entirely too early to bang the gavel and say this is the way it's going to be, but it's also entirely untrue to not look at this and pass judgment that the Pelicans are worse with DeMarcus Cousins. Right now, they are worse than the team they fielded before they had DeMarcus Cousins by every statistical measure, plus minus with those two on the floor. Offensive rating, they are 7 points, I think it's 7 points worse with these two playing together than they were before the trade. Defense, by the way, also measurably worse. Now, is that because they have three guys around them that just simply cannot play? Or is it because guys play worse with DeMarcus Cousins or two towers like this? More than 3 games will answer that question. But you can't beat around the bush. Right now, DeMarcus Cousins' addition to the Pelicans has made that team worse.
As Kevin Durant made the Warriors worse early on.
Well, listen. You got two guys that command 25 shots a game and are used to being the #1 option. That's why I bring up Alvin Gentry. Coaching has something to do with it. And here's how you know. Ask any aspiring head coach out there. Excuse me, we got a head coach in opening. And, you know, the two guys you got to work with is Anthony Davis and DeMarcus Cousins. Tell me who ain't going to want that job. And that's how you know. What I'm saying to you is this. Don't get me wrong. I'm not telling you that DeMarcus Cousins can't be a headache. I'm not trying to gloss over some of the distractions that he created. But you don't teach what he brings. And a lot of times I've often said this, and I'll leave it to y'all to answer this question before we go. I've often said this. You don't play, meaning you're a coach. You don't play. Well, what the hell is it that you do? Do you really think as a head coach, particularly in this day and age, with 12 brands on a particular team, depending on which team you're coaching, do you really think that you get to just highlight X's and O's? No. You got to motivate. You got to cajole. You got to massage. You got to do a whole bunch of things because that's what separates the guys who can be in the league as a coach and the guys that can't. You got to do that with the DeMarcus Cousins of the world, too.
The question with Boogie Cousins is not only his personality in the locker room, it's does he have the kind of game that is conducive to winning in the modern NBA?
Yes.
For his position, you know what he does best? Pass the ball. Like, people don't understand. DeMarcus Cousins is a brilliant player who needs to be in the right situation and coached up right with strong personalities around him in leadership roles. It remains to be seen whether or not that's the Pelicans. But everything he does on the floor is conducive to winning in the modern NBA.
Right now, we haven't even gotten to those problems you just enunciated about DeMarcus Cousins. We're not even at motivational problems. We're not even at behavioral problems. We're at X's and O problems. We're at no space on the floor problems. We're at Alvin Gentry problems. Wait till the behavior problems come on.
Okay.
They're going to come.
Yeah, they're going to come. But you can gloss over it if you have the coaching with that talent.
Veteran leadership.
Thank you for being
You
with
bet.
us.
Thanks for having me.
Speaking of beef, we got one that we haven't discussed yet, and we're not talking about Nicki Minaj and Remy Ma. The feud between Shaquille O'Neal and JaVale McGee is over, and you won't believe who ended it. That's next.